Good morning. It is Saturday, February the 5th, and this is The Drill. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Daily Declaration for Spiritual Warfare, the Novena, Pledge of Allegiance, and the Star-Spangled Banner, we will have Mike versus Donald, the No Free Lunch, and Are We Having Fun Yet? All that and more when I come back. Thank you. Ineffable Creator, who out of the treasures of thy wisdom has appointed 3 hierarchies of angels and set them in admirable order high above the heavens, and has disposed the divers portion of the universe in such marvelous array. Thou who art called the true source of light and supereminent principle of wisdom, be pleased to cast a beam of thy radiance upon the darkness of my mind and dispel me from the double darkness of sin and ignorance in which I have been born. Thou who makest eloquent the tongues of little children, fashion my words and pour upon my lips the grace of thy benediction. Grant me penetration to understand, capacity to retain, method and facility in study, subtlety in interpretation, and abundant grace of expression. Order the beginning, direct the progress, and perfect the achievement of my work. Thou who art true God and man, and livest and reignest forever and ever. Amen. Thank you. And now the Daily Declaration for Spiritual Warfare for February the 5th. I will rebuke your enemies with flames of fire. Let your heart rejoice, for I have promised that my faithful servants will flourish like grass. And I will extend my hand to bestow blessings on my servants. But I will show my fury to my enemies and to those who oppress my servants. Do not fear that you will be overcome by your enemies, for I will rebuke your enemies with flames of fire. Stand boldly before your enemies and tell them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. I am about to set fire to you, and it will consume all your trees, both green and dry. The blazing flame will not be quenched, and every face from south to north will be scorched by it. Everyone will see that I, the Lord, have kindled it. It will not be quenched. Isaiah chapter 66, verses 14 to 16, Ezekiel chapter 20, verses 47 to 48. Prayer declaration. Let your flame come and burn up all my enemies, Lord, all those who seek to bring oppression and captivity to your followers. Let your holy fire burn them until none of their wickedness remains. Let them not be able to deliver themselves from the power of your flames. And that was the Daily Declaration for Spiritual Warfare for February the 5th.
Stands
Thank you, thank you. Who is the true conservative? He is the person that understands that conservatism is not just about politics, but culture as well. He acts like an adult. He is patriotic and uses common sense. He makes judgments, refuses to speculate, speaks clearly and definitively, and is not afraid to say no. He is open-minded, asking why rather than why not. He is consistent, credible, and influential, not ashamed of his existence, unafraid to learn or correct his mistakes. He is a normal American, and he is better than the socialist. He is a better friend, father, brother, family member, and a better person, period. Thank you. Mike Pence and Donald Trump. So there seem to be at odds. Donald Trump said that Mike Pence was wrong to certify the 2020 presidential election. And Mike Pence has responded. He's giving a speech at the Federalist Society, and he's responded by saying that Donald Trump is wrong and that he had no authority to overturn the election. Well, Mike Pence is actually the one that's wrong here because, number one, Donald Trump didn't ask for him to overturn the election. He said what Donald Trump was saying he should have done was refuse to certify it. Okay, and if he doesn't certify the election, then there's a procedure that is followed. Then the whole matter goes to the House of Representatives, and the House of Representatives takes a vote on it, and it goes from there. So it's very possible that if it goes to the House of Representatives, that we'd still end up with the same result. But the point is, Mike Pence doesn't have the authority to overturn an election, nor was he being asked to overturn an election. He was asked to use a check and balance to make sure that we could further vet this election and make absolutely sure so that the American people can be confident that the person that the American people wanted elected president was indeed elected president. Thank you. And now there's no free lunch. Economics teaches you that making a choice means giving up something. And economics can help you appreciate complexity and how seemingly unrelated actions and people can become entangled. Russ Roberts. That making a choice means giving up something is not just the there's no free lunch part of the economics in one phrase. It is the essence of human action being the foundation of economics. Humans act, and in so acting, they make choices every second of the day. The choices they make that flow out of the basic functions of human action reflect a constant weighing of costs versus benefits. Some of these decisions happen in nanoseconds with no apparent consciousness behind them. Some are more deliberative and process-driven. But at its core, economics is both the living out of giving up something to receive something, in minor inconsequential categories or more significant ones, and the invisible entanglements of human actions with other human actions. This social cooperation starts with a human acting and becomes a whole lot of humans acting, individually and with collective consequence. This, my friends, is economics. And that was There's No Free Lunch. Thank you. And now, are we having fun yet? Nothing, absolutely nothing, made the 30-ish graduates of the class of 1982 feel quite so middle-aged as the eruption of 70s nostalgia among undergraduates and high school students at the end of the 90s. If the members of my generation agreed on one thing as we entered adulthood, it was our disdain for the decade in which we had come of age. My more leftish contemporaries looked backward to the heroic 60s. Those of more conservative outlook exulted in the Reagan 80s. All of us agreed that the 70s were a slum of a decade. Right or left, we delighted in the narrowing of neckties, the demise of disco, the restyling of the Camaro, the extinction of the Fern Bar. Imagine our dismay when only 2 decades later it all came roaring back. Happy face buttons and the Bee Gees, bell bottoms and glitter balls, pet rocks and platform shoes. In our accelerated era, the most hellacious styles can zoom through the cycle of chic in scarcely 20 years. Don't tell the kids that they have bad taste. We rediscover old things because we speak to the present in some unanticipated way. When old stock Americans suddenly went gaga for colonial artifacts in the 1930s, hanging battered pewter tankards over the mantels of their Park Avenue apartments and placing rickety old spinning wheels in the living rooms of their country homes, they were reasserting their connection to the country's history for a reason. And we can learn important things about the culture of the 1930s by inquiring into what that reason was. The same is true of the strange nexus between our time and the mood ring decade. From the point of view of the young, the 1970s must look like a time in which people had more fun than anybody is permitted to have today. The high school students and university undergraduates of the 1990s and 2000s live in a zero-tolerance world in which smoking is prohibited and seatbelt use is mandatory. Possession of a couple of grams of marijuana can send them to prison. The fear of AIDS or accusations of rape hover over every date. The legal drinking age has been hiked back to 21. They cannot bicycle without a helmet, cannot paddle a canoe without signing a disclaimer, cannot safely neck without a blood test and a formal grant of permission, cannot wear grandmother's old fur stole without risking an unpleasant confrontation with an animal rights activist. They imagine the 70s as a glorious moment of guiltless hedonism, and they yearn for the strobe lights of the discotheques as nostalgically as Talleyrand yearned for the courtliness of the ancient regime in France. Nobody who was born after the revolution, the wicked old nobleman once sighed, will ever know the sweetness of life. Imagine a club like Studio 54 opening in Rudy Giuliani's New York, a dance parlor in which nearly naked bartenders offered themselves to male and female customers alike, while the owners and their friends snorted cocaine in public view. Heroin was pumped in the bathroom stalls, and unusual sex acts were consummated in the alcoves overhead. In 1995, the place would have been permanently shuttered within the first 24 hours under a barrage of drug, prostitution, public hygiene, liquor licensing, and traffic violation charges. Imagine a movie like Lina Wertmüller's 1975 Swept Away, which treats rape as a deserved and comical comeuppance for a bossy woman, being released now. Or compare a year's worth of New York magazines from 1975 and 1995. The 1975 volume contains 209 photographs and drawings of scantily clad or naked or provocatively posed women. 1995 contains fewer than 30, and even the most lurid of those is far less lubricious than the earlier crop. Typical image from 1975, an ad for Scotch whiskey in which a sultry redhead in a bikini gazes smokily into the reader's eyes. Typical 1995 image, an ad for a gym featuring an unsmiling, muscled woman in a tight leotard. In the 1979 film Manhattan, Woody Allen quips that he's relaxing by reading the lingerie ads in the New York Times Magazine, a joke incomprehensible to anyone who began reading the magazine in the next decade. Hollywood movies were likewise toned down. Roger Moore's James Bond enjoyed at least half a dozen sexual encounters per film. Pierce Brosnan's was allowed only one. In the 1970s, the laws that require milk stores to display only the titles of Playboy and Penthouse had not yet been passed, and women grabbing a late-night half-gallon had to whack past the bare breasts of the pet of the month on their way to the register. College authorities winked at the discreet smoking of marijuana on campus. President Carter's advisor on drug policy, Dr. Peter Bourne, attended parties at the home of the head of the National Organization for Reform of the Marijuana Laws. Bourne got into trouble when it was discovered that cocaine had been consumed at the party, but incredibly, by contemporary standards, he survived, resigning only after he was caught signing a prescription for sedatives to a White House colleague who asked that Bourne insert a fictitious name in place of the user's real identity. Men who wanted to hint at their sophistication wore sterling silver cocaine spoons on chains around their necks. Harold Robbins published mass-market paperbacks in which men drive women wild by sprinkling powdered cocaine on their penises before sex. Variety reported that the Cheech and Chong stoner comedy Up in Smoke sold more tickets than any other movie in the United States and Canada in the week ending October 4th, 1978. 20 years later, Hollywood would release a movie about two fun-loving Klansmen before daring to make light of the dangers of drugs. The 1978 release of Animal House inspired boozy toga parties at fraternities across the country, in which the girls who attended arrived expected to be groped and mauled. In 1999, Dartmouth, the alma mater of the film's writer, Chris Miller, banned fraternities and sororities for good. President Ford was routinely photographed smoking a pipe, and nobody thought much of it. 20 years later, First Lady Hillary Rodham Clinton declared the entire White House, even her husband's office, a smoke-free zone, and awkwardly had to be begged to make exceptions when leaders from unenlightened countries like France came to visit. Back in a minute. Thank you. It's possible to see that recent history as a story of a once puritanical country going on a bender in the 70s, sobering up in the 80s, and then returning to its moralistic ways in the 90s. That is, in fact, how recent history usually is seen, which is why it is understandable that undergraduates bent on naughtiness would idealize the years of the debauch, much as the undergraduates of the serious-minded 1950s like to mimic the styles of the roaring 20s. But this version of recent history misses the mark. The debauchery of the 1970s is analogous to the frivolity and drunkenness with which we welcome a new century. In the morning, we put a compress on our head and wash up the glasses. That does not mean the clock has been turned back. The new era has arrived for keeps. Drugs, for instance. Yes, the enforcement of the drug laws has stiffened since the 1970s. Yes, too, young people must listen to much more scolding on the subject. This unpermissive stance has achieved some good results. Marijuana smoking by high school students tumbled by some 2/3 between 1980 and 92. Cocaine and heroin addiction dropped off in all age groups. But even when the war on drugs goes relatively well, millions of American young people smoke marijuana, swallow tranquilizers, and snort pain thinner. And since 1992, the war has not been going well. Half the progress made during the Reagan-Bush years was lost in the 5 years 1993 to 1997. A social evil that scarcely existed in 1960 became a chronic source of anxiety and grief in almost every industrial society, and new criminal enterprises made billions of dollars out of doping the Western world's youth. Sex followed a trajectory very similar to that of drug use. The compulsive promiscuity of the 70s has subsided, but it is very wrong to think of the sexual history of the past 40 years as the swinging of the pendulum from restraint to license and then back to restraint again. The 1970s blew to smithereens an entire structure of sexual morality. Revolutions like that do not last forever. They cannot. But the ending of a revolution is not the same as the restoration of the old order. It is the institutionalization of a new one. And that was Are We Having Fun Yet? From the book How We Got Here, the 70s. Thank you. And this is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, reminding you to take a listen to the John and Ken Show from 2 to 6 p.m. On weekdays, Monday through Friday, on AFM or on AM KFI 640. And also remember the hashtag Bring Back Bryan Suits, Bryan Suits. And other than that, until next time, remember to be polite, be smart, be beautiful, and remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.